Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Welcome to a new episode of All Things Policy. I'm Aishwaria, research analyst for Pakistan Studies at Takshashila, and your host for today. While the conflict in West Asia has dominated headlines in recent months, today we're turning our attention to another conflict that is unfolding right here in our neighborhood between two sides that were once close allies, Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban. It will be 5 years this August since the Taliban's return to power in Kabul, and we have since witnessed escalating tensions between Pakistan and the Taliban, a relationship that has also emerged as a significant security concern for Pakistan. So, what went wrong between Pakistan and the Taliban? How did a relationship built on decades of strategic cooperation reach this point? And what does this escalating confrontation mean for both the countries and the wider region? To understand these questions from a local perspective, I'm joined by Natasha Matloob, a fantastic scholar and investigative journalist based out of Islamabad. Her work has appeared in several national and international publications, and she focuses primarily on the security architecture of the Indian subcontinent. Natasha, it's a pleasure to have you on All Things Policy. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Aishwarya, for having me. It's a pleasure being there. And I would love to discuss these dynamics unfolding in South Asia with you.
Fantastic. Let's get right into it. Now we see Pakistan is in headlines since February end for mediating the conflict in West Asia. While that remains a big part of Pakistan's, international presence right now, I also want to look at this conflict with Afghanistan. In February, Pakistan's Defense Minister Khwaja Asif declared a so-called open war against Afghanistan. If you could help us understand that, does that label match how people in the border districts of Afghanistan and Pakistan actually experienced this shift, or had it felt like the war had already intensified before this term was officially used by Pakistani government?
So Pakistan and Afghan Taliban, they were historically close for decades and decades because they shared a common objective of defeating the foreign bank governments in Kabul and ending the US military presence, or before that the Soviet presence in Afghanistan. But after the Taliban returned to power in August 2021, uh, it's a slight change of the dynamics, the nature of the relationship, because the Afghan Taliban were no longer an insurgent organization anymore. They became a government, and an insurgent organization and government are two different entities, and their priorities and objectives are different. So when their priorities shifted from fighting a war to preserving sovereignty and maintaining their people and proving their legitimacy to their people, it's when the issues rose between the two countries. And meanwhile, Pakistan's priority, given some fragile economic conditions we have with our dependence on IMF and foreign economic aid. So for us, for Pakistan, it was very important. It is very important to fight terrorism in any form it is present. So in the present dynamics, it's the clash of interest between the two entities who have been friends for like quite some time, for decades. So it's just that our interests are no longer aligned, and it is where the essence of conflict lies.
Right, like when we talk about Afghanistan, Pakistan issues well beyond the Taliban taking over, the Durand line, the border that was drawn between Afghanistan and Pakistan, has been contested since the 1893 I believe that the Taliban basically inherited the border issues from previous Afghan governments. Everything, all the issues that Islamabad had with Kabul and the previous, be it the Ashraf Ghani government or the Hamid Karzai government, the Taliban has sort of inherited at least these border issues. And from where I see it, this conflict with Pakistan has persisted in that scope. Would you say that this is the crux of the Pakistan Taliban conflict and the potential resolution to the Durand line, which obviously is not as simple and reductive as I make it sound, is enough to contain this conflict?
Okay, what I believe personally is Durand line is one of the many factors, but in the current context, as we see conflict, Durand line is not the center of the conflict. The current round of conflict is more focused on the resurgence of terrorism in Pakistan that has increased after 2021 since the Taliban have taken over Kabul. The airline issue is there. It is a border dispute and it has been there like since 1947 when Pakistan was created. Uh, it is a historical issue. Pakistan has recognized, of course, the British draw the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan in dating back to 1800s, and then Pakistan inherited it. But it's just a border issue, and it's always been there. And back in when we see in 1980s and 70s, the border issue, the Durand line was there, but still Pakistan and Afghanistan were quite on good terms. So the current issue is not much about Durand line as it is about terrorism and
Uh-huh.
the resultant airstrikes that both sides are conducting on each other. So it has more to do with that rather than Durand line.
Right. Speaking of terrorism, let's address the elephant in the room, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan. This group, the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, for our listeners who are not aware, this group is an ideological ally of the Afghan Taliban. Afghan Taliban and TTP have fought alongside each other against the Western forces, the NATO troops that were deployed in Afghanistan. So both the TTP and Afghan Taliban share ideology, ethnicity, and they often have familial ties. But Kabul, the Taliban administration, insists that this is a homegrown Pakistani problem. From where you are sitting right now, is that distinction real or rhetorical? If you could shed some light on what is TTP, how is it so ingrained in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province of Pakistan, which borders Afghanistan, of course. If you could, talk about TTP, give us some local context on this group. The current dominant tribe of the TTP is the Masood tribe. So, if you could help us understand these tribal dynamics, because, in India, or definitely in Western
Yes.
publications of how Afghanistan Pakistan conflict is reported, I often see that this tribal dynamics is somehow missed in this entire conflict. So, if you could help us, take us through that, please.
Yes, TTP is the central issue today in the Pakistan-Afghanistan tensions, and TTP and Afghan Taliban they are often misperceived as one entity, but of course they are not the same organization. They do share ideological roots, historical relationships, personal networks, and ties. But of course, they are two distinct organizations. And as far as the TTP is concerned, it is often associated with the Masood tribe, which is based in South Waziristan. It's an agency in the KPK region, and its early leaders, including Baitullah Masood, Hakimullah Masood, they were all from Masood tribes. And even today, the current leader, Noor Wali Masood, he is also from the Masood tribe. But we can't like really associate that it's the Masood tribe and TTP that they are the same. There are many other tribes as well. And it recruits across multiple Pashtun tribes in the former Fata region, including Wazirs, Momans, Afridis, to some extent Orakzais as well. So these are the tribes for people who don't have understanding. Wazirs, Momans, Afridis, Shinwaris, Orakzais, these are the tribes in the KPK region of Pakistan. So
Hmm.
most member of these tribes are not militants. We can't associate like tribal thing with terrorism. They are two different things. Of course, there is an overlap of some tribes with terrorism, but we can't associate the tribal thing is like synonymous with terrorism. In fact, tribal communities have suffered enormously from TTP violence, and many tribal elders and local leaders have been targeted because they oppose the group. So tribal identity helps explain some recruitment patterns and leadership backgrounds, but the TTP today is fundamentally an ideological insurgent organization rather than a tribal movement that it is commonly misperceived as in local and international media.
Understood. Pakistan's Army Chief Field Marshal Asim Munir has claimed 70% of TTP fighters crossing into Pakistan. He claims that they are Afghans. Is there any local credibility to that figure, or does it function mainly as a domestic political device?
Okay, so you are referring to General Asim Munir's statements to Afghan nationals as being part of TTP.
Yeah, just to understand that RTTP is the TTP mostly made up of Afghan nationals, or does it also have, the local Pakistani population?
It's quite a disputed thing here as well. And what he is referring to is that many of the terrorists that currently TTP has, they are Afghan nationals, of course, and there is some truth to the statement as well. But if we see from across the border, the Taliban leadership they deny these claims, and they say that it's, as you mentioned earlier, that it's much of Pakistan's internal problem, and we would not fight Pakistan's war or conflict within our own borders. So there is a great debate on this topic, on the scale of Afghan national participation inside Pakistan's security situation and the degree of support or tolerance provided by the Taliban authorities. Of course, Taliban or Afghan Taliban, they are providing safe havens to the TTP in Afghanistan, and this is an issue that has been raised by Pakistani officials on multiple forums. But Afghan Taliban, they have turned a deaf ear to this concern of Pakistan. So these issues remain politically contested and are difficult to verify independently. But of course, there is some truth to the fact that Afghan Talibans are very much involved in
Mm-hmm.
the terrorism situation in Pakistan to some extent.
Right. The militancy environment is so complex in that region. And I think one of the fears that the Taliban has is heavily cracking down on TTP could push the cadres towards the Islamic State Khorasan province, which is arguably the strongest branch of the Islamic State, that does not hold any territory but has some presence in the so called Khorasan province, predominantly in Afghanistan. And the ISKP, the Islamic State, is the biggest rival to the Taliban rule inside Afghanistan right now. Do you think that calculus looks sound from the ground, or is this a convenient excuse by the Taliban to avoid any sort of crackdown on the TTP?
So ISKP is Taliban's internal security threat. And of course, it's not something limited to Afghanistan only. It is a threat to Pakistan as well, to India as well, to the whole of South Asia. Of course, a terrorist organization. No matter if we generalize it to our region, it always has transnational repercussions. So we cannot like limit it to any boundary. So unlike Taliban, who governs Afghanistan as a state, ISKP is, I can say, more aggressive because it seeks a transnational Islamic state and accuses, of course, Taliban of compromising by engaging diplomatically with regional governments. ISKP has targeted Taliban officials, and there are rivalries and issues between the two organizations. And when it comes to Pakistan, its biggest concern currently is TTP, and the Taliban's biggest concern is ISKP. So it's again a conflict of interest between the two sides. Pakistan is more interested, and of course, every country operates on the premises of their national interest. So Pakistan's national interest at the moment is fighting with TTP in eradicating its strongholds from Pakistan. And while one Taliban government, they are much more focused on eradicating the roots of ISKP from their areas. So problem is that they're deeply divided over how to address this transnational threat, and
Mm-hmm.
this cooperation becomes difficult because fundamentally their interests are not aligned.
Right, right. And the implications, the human implications of this conflict is something that we cannot ignore. So I want to understand that trade through the land borders between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which is the Torkham and Chaman. I might be butchering the pronunciation. It has been repeatedly disrupted every time there are border clashes between both the Taliban and Pakistani forces. So, who actually absorbs that economic shock? Is this the Afghan state, the Pakistani state, or is it the traders and transporters in between?
Trade between Pakistan and Afghanistan is one of the clearest examples of how economics and security are interconnected, and Afghanistan depends more on Pakistan as compared to as Pakistan depends on it. Uh, it depends on Pakistan for its land routes, for access to international markets, while Pakistan benefits from exports, transit trade, and its position as a gateway to Central Asia.
Mm-hmm.
So, as far as you are referring that who is bearing more loss, I think both countries are bearing the loss, especially the people in the border areas. The scope is different. Afghanistan tends to suffer more economically and humanitarianly because it's a landlocked country and it depends like heavily on regional trade routes and border access to Pakistan. In Pakistan, it bears a significant security burden through cross-border militancy, particularly TTP attacks, as well as financial costs of counterterrorism and border management that we have been bearing. Like our position for foreign investment becomes weak. US and Chinese investments are there in Pakistan. So we both are bearing the cost. Just it's that its scope is different. And at the end of the day, of these conflicts, the largest chunk of the cost is beared by common people, not governments. So the biggest losers are ordinary people on both sides of the border. They are the farmers, they are the traders, transport workers, and border communities who are paying, unfortunately, the price for a conflict they didn't even create.
Right. I'm trying to understand that is there a local reading of this conflict? I mean, do people on the borders see this as a conflict, as a persistent conflict, because the cost falls on the Pashtun population across both borders instead of affecting, say, Kabul or Islamabad. However, Kabul has faced the repercussions of this conflict through airstrikes, and we've seen, some targeted assassinations by TTP even in Islamabad. So, how is the Pashtun population perceiving this?
I tell you how ordinary people in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, the Pashtun population, feel is that they are overwhelmingly exhausted from this conflict that has been there for like decades. Uh, since we can trace the conflict back to the Soviet times, Soviet-Afghan war, and we have people on the border areas. They have been living through this conflict, this terrorism, military operations, this displacement. So most are least interested in geopolitical narratives than in simple things like whether their children would be able to go to school, or whether markets remain open, or whether they can earn a livelihood. These are the concerns of common people, and people everywhere they are same, and their basic human rights are the most important thing that they want. But unfortunately, the conflict has like exhausted them, and they are especially affected because every closure disrupt the trade and separate the families. Pashtun families, they are distributed across the border between Pakistan and
Right.
Afghanistan. Some tribes are there. Some people of their tribes are on the Afghanistan side. And before this conflict, the borders were open. People could go from Pakistan to Afghanistan or vice versa. But since this conflict, there is a widespread concern about the TTP and a belief that cross-border militancy must be addressed. So while political narratives differ, common thread among ordinary people is a desire for security, stability and normalcy, where they could even enjoy their basic human rights or what they need for their survival, if not prosperity.
I mean, I know that at least people across the border have this understanding where they don't recognize the Turan line because, as you said, the families, the tribes are split on both sides of the border. So just yeah, I this brings us to the end of this podcast, and I have a kind of a fourth visionary, forward-looking question for you. Where 20 years from now, will this period be remembered as the moment Pakistan and Afghan ties broke permanently, or as one more cycle in a relationship that's survived?
20 years is a long time, and how unpredictable this region has been. I cannot predict a single outcome. I think there multiple scenarios might emerge depending on how this relationship evolves.
Right.
And of course, there's a saying in international relations that you can change your friends, but you can never change your neighbors. So it is important for both countries, and it's in their best interest for both Pakistan and Afghanistan. And I would say same for Pakistan and India. If they develop strong ties, economical and cultural, they are there. They just have to cultivate it. They just have to build on it. So if we address these questions, if the governments of both sides, they set their egos aside, or they look for some long-term solutions instead of some temporary solutions, so there is a scope of a very prosperous South Asian region, provided if we manage these issues on 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 the builds of realism, on the builds of best interests for our people. So I really wish and hope that these issues between the two countries get resolved in a better way, and that would be in best interest for populations on both sides.
Absolutely. I mean, beyond the economic, even the social potential of this entire region is so high. And as you know, people on both sides of the border, be it journalists, activists, scholars, are constantly trying to find ways and avenues where this possibility does exist, where realism and pragmatism takes over. And as you rightly said, we can choose our friends, we can't choose our neighbors.
Exactly. If militant violence continues, then common people would have to bear the price, and it
Mm-hmm.
would be disastrous for both governments. Border communities on both sides, they would be the biggest victims, and they might end up in more hostilities and issues if we don't resolve it now, if we don't take it seriously now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. On that note, thank you, Natasha, for joining us, and for all the listeners for tuning in. And it was a lovely conversation. I hope to speak to you again as the conflict unfolds, and we'll always have a lot more to talk about. Thank you for joining me on All Things Policy, Natasha.
Thank you so much, Shreya, for having me. It was a pleasure discussing this important topic with you. I really enjoyed the conversation and looking forward to joining you again. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.